History textbooks tend to simplify this story. They present the creation of Israel as a direct response to the Holocaust, as if one tragedy led cleanly and inevitably to one outcome. It feels logical, structured, and easy to follow. But that version of history leaves out the one factor that actually made it possible: timing. Israel was not created simply because something happened. It was created because multiple forces, political, emotional, and strategic, collapsed into alignment at the exact same moment. And if even one of those forces had shifted slightly, the outcome might never have existed. This is the part most people never see. They assume history is inevitable, that once an event occurs, everything that follows was always going to happen. But real history does not move in straight lines. It builds pressure slowly, often invisibly, and then suddenly everything shifts at once. When that shift happens, it does not wait for consensus or permission. It simply moves. So the real question is not how Israel was created. The real question is why it happened exactly when it did. Why not earlier, when the idea already existed? Why not later, when the world had more time to process, negotiate, and stabilize? Why at that exact moment, when emotions were raw, power was shifting, and global systems were fragile? To understand that, you have to go back to a time when Israel did not exist, but the idea of it already did. In the late 19th century, across Europe, a quiet but powerful realization was forming. Jewish communities had lived throughout Europe for centuries, building traditions, businesses, and intellectual life. In many places they tried to integrate, adapting to local cultures and becoming part of the societies around them. On the surface, it appeared that progress was being made. But beneath that surface, something remained unchanged. There was always a boundary. Sometimes it was subtle, expressed through exclusion or social limitations. Other times, it was violently clear. Anti-Semitism was not an isolated occurrence. It was a recurring pattern. Over time, that pattern led to an uncomfortable realization among some Jewish thinkers: no matter how much they adapted, full acceptance would always remain out of reach. One of the individuals who articulated this most clearly was Theodor Herzl. He was not the first to imagine a Jewish homeland, but he reframed the idea in a way that made it feel urgent and necessary. He argued that anti-Semitism was not temporary and would not disappear over time. Instead, it would evolve and persist in new forms. If that was true, then assimilation alone could never guarantee safety. Herzl's proposal was not driven by emotion alone. It was strategic. He suggested that Jewish people needed a state of their own, not as a symbol, but as a system of security, a place where they would not depend on tolerance, because they would not be a minority. But this idea immediately raised a difficult question: where would such a state exist? Several locations were discussed at the time, including areas outside the Middle East. However, for many, the answer pointed toward Palestine, a land deeply connected to Jewish history and identity. At the same time, Palestine was already home to Arab communities who had lived there for generations and had their own deep connection to the land. This is where the tension begins, and it never fully disappears. From the very beginning, this was not simply about creating something new. It was about creating something in a place that already mattered to others. For decades, the idea remained unresolved because the conditions needed to make it a reality had not yet aligned. Then came the first major disruption, World War I. Long-standing empires collapsed, borders were redrawn, and power structures shifted dramatically. The Ottoman Empire, which had controlled much of the region, fell apart. In its place, new political arrangements emerged. One of the most significant changes was that Britain took control of Palestine. In 1917, it issued the Balfour Declaration, expressing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. On the surface, this appeared to be a major step forward for the Zionist movement. It offered recognition and legitimacy. However, beneath that promise lay a critical contradiction. At the same time, Britain had made commitments to Arab leaders, suggesting support for independence in the same region. Two different promises were being made about the same land, with no clear way to fulfill both. This contradiction was not a minor detail. It created a structural tension that would shape everything that followed. As the 1920s and 1930s unfolded, that tension began to intensify. Jewish immigration to Palestine increased, driven both by ideological commitment and by necessity. Conditions in Europe were deteriorating, and many Jewish families saw fewer and fewer options for safety. Palestine became more than an aspiration, it became a refuge. However, as immigration increased, perceptions on the ground began to shift. Communities that had once coexisted started to view each other differently. What had once been a shared space began to feel contested. This change in perception had consequences. Protests escalated into clashes, and clashes grew into broader violence. Trust eroded gradually but consistently. Still, no lasting solution emerged. The system was accumulating pressure without releasing it. Then came the event that would fundamentally transform the situation, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the subsequent Holocaust. This was not simply another period of persecution, it was a catastrophic rupture. 6 million Jews were murdered and entire communities were destroyed. Beyond the scale of the tragedy, there was a profound psychological shift. After the Holocaust, the question was no longer whether Jewish communities needed safety. That question had already been answered in the most devastating way possible. The real question became where that safety could be found. Refugee camps across Europe were filled with survivors who had nowhere to go. Many countries maintained strict immigration limits, leaving few options available. In this context, the idea of a Jewish homeland became urgent. It was no longer theoretical or aspirational, it was immediate and necessary. At the same time, the British Empire was weakening. Years of global conflict had left it economically and politically strained. In Palestine, it was increasingly unable to manage the growing conflict between Jewish and Arab communities. Violence was escalating and pressure was mounting from all sides. Eventually, Britain made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. It stepped back and transferred responsibility to the United Nations. This shift transformed the issue from a regional matter into a global one. In 1947, the United Nations proposed the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine. The plan called for dividing the land into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international administration. While the plan appeared structured and balanced on paper, it was highly controversial. Jewish leaders accepted it, seeing it as a viable path to statehood and international recognition. Arab leaders rejected it, viewing it as an external imposition that disregarded the rights and presence of Arab communities. At this point, tension had reached its peak. The system was fully loaded, and all the necessary conditions were in place. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The declaration itself was brief, but its impact was immediate. Within hours, both the United States and the Soviet Union recognized the new state. This alignment between two emerging superpowers was not accidental. It reflected a convergence of strategic interests at a moment when global power dynamics were shifting. The timing was critical. The moral impact of the Holocaust was still fresh. Britain had withdrawn, the United Nations had provided a framework, and global powers saw strategic value in the region. This combination created a narrow window in which the creation of Israel became possible. However, that window closed almost immediately. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War began as neighboring Arab states intervened. For Israelis, this was a fight for survival. For Palestinians, it marked the beginning of the Nakba, a period of widespread displacement and loss. These two experiences unfolded simultaneously, creating two deeply different but equally real narratives, one centered on independence and statehood, the other on displacement and catastrophe. This dual reality is why the moment remains so contested. It cannot be reduced to a single perspective without losing essential truth. Understanding this requires holding both narratives at once, even when they are in tension with each other. The deeper insight is that the creation of Israel was not inevitable. It was the result of a specific set of conditions aligning at a particular moment. If any of those conditions had been different, the outcome might have changed. This reveals something broader about how history works. Major events are not simply the result of single causes. They emerge from the interaction of multiple forces, each influencing the others. This is why the story of 1948 still matters. It is not just about the past. It provides a framework for understanding how significant changes occur. Around the world, there are situations where pressure is building, where unresolved tensions exist, and where conditions have not yet fully aligned. When they do, change can happen quickly and unexpectedly. It may appear sudden, but it is actually the result of forces that have been developing over time. The creation of Israel demonstrates how a moment of alignment can produce outcomes that last for generations. It also shows that such moments are rare and often brief. Once they pass, they cannot be easily recreated. This is why timing matters so much in history. It determines not only what happens, but whether something can happen at all. In the end, the story is not just about the birth of a nation. It is about the nature of historical change. It is about how pressure, timing, and decision-making intersect to create moments that reshape the world. And it is about how those moments continue to influence the present long after they have passed.